Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today we'll be taking a look at the farewell song of Marcel Labrume by Attilio Micheluzzi, I believe is how you'd say the name. Attilio Micheluzzi. This is newly out from Fantagraphics, and it seems like it's going to be part of an ongoing collection of this artist's work, kind of like their Jacques Tardy library or the Breccia library, anything like that. It seems like it's another lost European, not lost European master, but untranslated European master kind of book. The first story here, the introduction to the character Marcel Labrume, this collects two stories. This one was done in 1980, and you can get a sense right away of Micheluzzi's artwork. It has kind of a like Frank Frazetta, like a clumsier Frank Frazetta-ish kind of feel, but like some really nice graphic imagery. I think that's where his work excels, is in the use of the black and the white. Some really great compositions in that sense. Some of the rendering stuff's not my most, it's not the best stuff I've seen, but the compositions are really awesome all throughout. So this first story is the titular character Marcel Labrume. This is set in 1940. Marcel is a journalist working in like Beirut, and he's caught up. Beirut itself is caught up. It's in like one of these in between places in World War II, where like France and Germany are both kind of seeming to have like equal influence there, and there's some Russian influence and there's some Islamic influence. It's just like a real melting pot of, it feels like kind of like a Casablanca type of thing, where there's just all these different forces and mercenaries and black market and stuff going on. So you have Marcel, and he's a journalist, a French journalist in this area, and he's pretty connected and pretty protected. And in this first story here of the two, you have Marcel getting involved with smuggling this character here, whose name is Montfort Abraham Spirikowski. He's a Jew who is trying to escape back to, he's trying to go to Palestine to help found like the Israeli state. So he's a Zionist, and they're trying to extract him from wherever he's at and get him across the border. And so there's some Islamic people on the other side of that trying to stop the Zionists from coming in. You can see here the thing that I'm talking about, that's one of the real strengths of the artwork in this book, is the design, the use of pattern and design to get the really striking graphic compositions. And even like having this little bit with the lights here is really fantastic. So really enjoy that aspect of the art. This story was a little bit more difficult for me to read because it really quickly just introduces you to so many characters. I have this problem with a lot of European graphic novels, actually, that are political in nature, especially when they're attached to historical periods, in particular World War II. There's a bunch of political talk that maybe just doesn't translate so well for an American reader, because there's this general, or there's just a lot of historical facts that are probably more common knowledge to a European audience, that to me, like, I probably maybe got that in history kind of, but when people are like casually referencing certain kind of people and events to explain and move the story forward, I just don't catch it. And then that's happening also on top of introducing a bunch of new people really, really, really quickly, and trying to figure out who's actually an important player and who's not, while I'm also trying to figure out what exactly whose motivations are, is difficult for me. I also just have a trouble with that in very like tracking too many characters. It's even more difficult when you have a realistic style like this, because you don't have those like silhouettes and character design details to catch on to. You kind of just have like Alex Raymond Blonde 101. So I got a little confused in this, and it was hard to tell who was super important. But some of the major players are, there's this character here who's a German officer, Steiner, And there's this woman here who's like a kind of starlit female aviator character. She's the one who's really there to try and help Spirikowski escape to Palestine. There's some French officers. There's some battles between two different German officers for power, like someone in the military and someone in the police. You kind of get a page here where you look at a lot of the different people. So you have Marcel and Carol out here, and then you have the commissioner, General LaFoyle, the German representative, the police precinct, the Islamic people in this house, Italian representative, there's French representative. Like, there's just too many cooks in the kitchen in this story. And, you're thinking, okay, well, whatever, we have like this whole book to go. But actually, there's two stories in this book, so it's even a shorter story. And really, pretty quickly, a lot of those people become irrelevant because the story moves into like the escape in the desert, and some of those people and what their machinations are doing become important with what's going on in the desert. But in a like 50 some odd, yeah, a 50-page story, 48-page story, it was just a lot of like things that I think were in the writer's head that maybe would have been in the reader's head in Europe or in Europe at the time, but the writing in this just didn't really do it for me. But the art, there's a lot of really cool, like, comics, pen and ink, photorealism type of stuff to appreciate. And then at the end of this story here, they say, okay, this character, this Marcel Labrume that we introduced you to, we're setting up, like this, well, not Indiana Jones, but kind of like this cool reporter smuggler character that you could imagine making more volumes with. And then they say, well, this was 1940 and he died in 1942, as far as we know. So they have like this vague ending that they leave open. And then here they tell that like it's assumed he died after this, and they treat it like it's a historical fact or something. And then they have a quote from Marcel Proust, and it's just treated like a tribute to a real person. And I looked it up, and it's not. So a strange story, like the way the story is structured, how heavy it is up front, how it ends kind of thin in the back end where you don't feel like all of the threads got really tied together all the way, or even like, why did I even ever meet that character in the first place? And then I don't know, it was just a weird book. So then you get to, they made a second one. Oh, I thought he died, why did you make a second one? And in this one, I think I enjoyed this one a lot more. The narrative's a lot more straightforward in terms of who you need to know and what you need to know. You get Marcel Labrume basically here. It starts with him having stepped on a grenade, and I really love the abstraction. Again, I think that's the most impressive part about the art to me, is the kind of pop art abstraction that is used in the cartooning. So you get Marcel Labrume has stepped on a landmine and got lucky, and it only kind of blew up or something, but he's been captured, and he's in this camp. And so the rest of the story is basically following him escape from this camp. Get some really nice, again, really nice designs and art here, really wonderful compositions across the page. I really like this moment of drawing here where Marcel is carrying this lamp, and so the brightness of the lamp, and this is like a photographic technique applied to cartooning, which is interesting. It's just the lamp is overexposing the light, especially if you're one of these women that's in the back of this truck that he's been arrested and transported, and then he takes over the truck and realizes it's also transporting these women that have been captured. But from their point of view inside, where you've got this really stark black and white, like milk caniff type of setup, this would be so overexposed to your eyes, which have constricted. So I think that's just a really, really amazing piece of cartooning that at first is jarring because you just have this floating hand. The placement might be a little funky. It might need to be a little down a little more, but the idea of that and the perceptual effect for the person in the car, I think that is such a cool decision there. You get a reference in this story to the fact that the Carol Gibson character from the previous story had died at the end of it. You also see where some of the surface rendering is getting more competent and confident as the artist continues to work. I think this is such a strong composition, first off, but also just the pen work and stuff seems more like it's coming together to make an image, where on some of these you still get like these lines that are like out of, you kind of just putting lines down to put lines down. Here it starts to feel like everything has a purpose. So I'm seeing an artist growing, which makes me curious to see anything else that does come out from this collection by Fantagraphics. One of the things I found strange about the writing, particularly in the second book, is that there's like a narrator talking that sounds like it is Marcel Labrume, but then Marcel will also, in his head, in the word balloons, like talk to the narrator himself. So it's like he's having a conversation with himself in his head, but also like half with the reader. So, don't you know Arabic? Don't you have dark hair and eyes? Maybe you'll get out of this. Stay calm. And then, Merde, can you shut up? And then he has this conversation. Molino, you know who that is? Like asking the narrator. That son of a bitch from last night car chase. Of course I know that. How would I not know that? And I didn't really get anything in the story that would suggest that other than the fact that he stepped on the landmine, that he's having some kind of effects from the concussion or something, that he's having these hallucinations, but it didn't seem to play that big of a part in the story. I really like the cartooning on this character here, this character Tarzan, who's one of the people that Marcel runs into as he's running away. This story more like goes from meeting one interesting character to a next. It's not so much like all lobbed on you at once. Another character that he's meeting in this sequence, he's staying in a brothel where this Tarzan guy is like one of the helping hands, I guess. I really love the control, and this is where you start to see the mastery of the surface stuff come into play a little bit more again, is the difference between the madam at the brothel and Marcel in terms of like rendering is night and day different. This is very scratchy, very heavy, thick lines, some brushwork, and then she's treated with like the most perfect, clean, like I went out and got a razor thin technical pen, and then has some really beautiful bouncy work in the hair. But she looks so clean and smooth and like powdered and everything just because of the difference between his absolutely soot covered dirt body and the type of line he uses for her. I think it's a really beautiful, beautiful moment. Really interesting choice of material there that makes for a stunning image. But like some of the writing is still very, from I guess today's point of view, it just feels very childish. I think when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I had this view of the European scene as much more adult and mature just because it had nudity and things like that. And it wasn't doing superheroes, it was telling stories about, like, quote, real people. I'm coming to see now, just in my older age, how much of a facade that is. I also think because for some reason the strip legacy of Alex Raymond and Milton Caniff, Stan Drake, those kind of artists that I learned all about while working on Strange Death seems to have had a larger impact over there. That carried with it like this more sophisticated look of like an adult soap opera drama. It feels more dramatic. But there's so much stuff in this that is just stupid action adventure comics that really, I think it just, these things are as silly as any superhero book. Just because they're self-contained graphic novels doesn't really change anything. So, like, an example of that is here, one of the prostitutes from the brothel is trying to distract people, and so she just like barters a peek at her chest with this guy on the boat, and she's just like showing her tits the whole time because he gets to row while he's looking at her chest. So just, I don't know, stuff like that that's totally unnecessary. And of course she winds up getting killed or whatever. It's an interesting thing here where the photograph of a Carol Gibson is put in, and they definitely call her Gibson Girl at some point too. So maybe Carol Gibson is a real person, but I looked up the Marcel Labrume and I didn't find anything about him being real. So I little confusing there, but interesting, like photo collage, and then some maps back here, which I guess would be interesting to people who are compelled by historical stuff like this, but I'm not. It's cool that it's in there. I will say another thing that I've said on the channel before, and the kind of my feeling this I was just talking about with like the more or less adult, is that stories like this that deal with wartime and politics can feel like more adult because it's like, oh, you're dealing with real world concerns. But I realize one of the reasons that I have trouble with stories that are very, very deeply political works is that usually it's just a bunch of like, he said this, she said that, they did this, and it doesn't feel mature to me at all. It just feels like people who like to play those shitty games in junior high and high school have been allowed to rule the world and make that stuff seem more important than it is. And I think we see that in our current election situation, is that, people have told me on the channel before, like, those works deal with politics. Like, there's nothing more real world than that. And I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think my rebuttal is no, there is nothing real world about politics. That is a made up, fake ass world of abstractions that we've let people get us trapped in. And there's nothing real about it at all. And there's nothing real to me about people who are just stand-ins for those kind of actors as well. These political actors who just sit there in rooms and talk to each other about who's going to go where and who's moving what. It just sounds like the same bullshit that went on in high school. I'd much rather have stories about people dealing with things in their real life, and more down to earth and more real. The political stuff to me just seems is still infantile. I've seen stuff like Paco Roca can do stuff that's really good and show the intricacies of people butting their heads up against the system. That's a different kind of thing. But this kind of thing where you just have like political thriller, to me is not any more mature. And oftentimes, like with all of the casual nudity and that kind of unnecessary stuff, to me is more sophomoric than a lot of the superhero stuff that gets accused of being so sophomoric. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book, Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.